Hey folks, so this week's episode is going to be a bit special in this is very likely to trigger anyone who's ever spent hours suffering through ice cave puzzles. See, thanks to both the Indie Gaming Collective and developer Wired Dream Studios, I received review key to Red Ronin, a turn-based title that sees you sliding and slicing through 8 chapters of puzzle solving and perforation. Join me as I find out if the sanguine-soaked slip and slide put the laughter in slaughter, or if it left me feeling like seppuku was the best option. I'm your host Arlyeon. Let's find out together. You take the role of Red, a street samurai whose mercenary career came to an end when a job went wrong and you found yourself abandoned by your team. Your capture was swift, the torture was not. And yet Red's resolve held on for years, because she promised to once more meet up with her former allies, if only so she could put them to the blade for abandoning her. But what really happened that day? And what terrible fate are you hurtling towards that would see you falling to your death? You might not want to think too hard on that last one, because while the game does kick off with it, it's never actually answered over the course of the game, which is then compounded by the fact that Red Ronin leaves off with an entirely separate sequel hook/stinger. Still, despite that bit of narrative weirdness, the story's fairly enjoyable. Red's quest for revenge starts off straightforward enough, but as you begin to receive recordings of what went down on the evening she was captured and what followed, the waters become increasingly muddy, especially if you take the time to scrutinize the bios of her former colleagues. And the snippets you get of the world, both from the small chats at her apartment with Isaac, her little row buddy, and the weird broadcasts on her television, which certainly lend themselves to yet more questions. Then the game ended, and I was left to kick rocks. Still, if I can't chat much about the story, there's plenty to go over when it comes to Red Ronin's mechanics. See, while Ronin does have your stylish slicing your way through slews of goons with enough efficiency it'd rival the Bride, this feat isn't achieved through action combat. Rather, each stage plays out like a strategic puzzle of the slidey sort. That's right, every single stage of the game plays out like an ice cavern puzzle. Wait, no, come back! Let me clarify, because this honestly does make for some interesting, at times slick, segments of gameplay. See, each of Red Ronin's chapters consist of a number of puzzle rooms, where you'll need to do your best to get to the exit, though given Red doesn't have a single pacifistic bone in her body, it'll be only after she's done eviscerating every enemy around, and that's really where things get tricky. To wit, Red is incredibly squishy, to the point that every single opponent is more than capable of ending her in a single hit. What's more, once enemies become aware of you, they'll all begin to move whenever you do, forcing you to plan ahead, which is about the point that her slidiness becomes a bit of an asset as well, given she can cross more ground than they can typically, and her dashes are deadly. That's right, so long as you slide through an enemy's tile, she'll cause all but the toughest of enemies to drop dead from the dash. Suffice to say, this leads to some pretty cinematic moments of rows of mooks getting sliced into sashimi, and potentially more when you start making use of her row buddy Isaac. See, Red's repertoire can be expanded by collecting power-ups within the various rooms, and they come in 2 flavors. One is a tile that lets you redirect our Scarlet Samurai's trajectory, allowing you to set up complex chains of dashes to annihilate adversaries in one turn. The other slows down time, enabling you one free action without needing to worry about your foes. What's more, it's possible to even stack these items to allow more complex strategies. And if you can clear out these rooms in an efficient manner, you can even hoard these items to a degree, as you do maintain whatever extras you've acquired. Admittedly, this is only somewhat helpful given the game's difficulty is adaptive, as it will spawn less items if you're a consummate pack rat. Inversely, it'll also ensure you're always provided the base minimum need to survive whatever trials you come across. And, there are definitely trials to overcome. Advancing through the game's chapters will gradually introduce a number of elements, such as enemies with increased mobility, or the ability to survive an attack from you, making ending your turn anywhere near their proximity lethal. That said, it wasn't really the evolution of the enemies that really gave me pause. I mean, yes, the boss fights are a cut above their peers, and each one forces you to contend with very different mechanics, such as needing to dash clear of tiles that'll explode in real time, or dodging someone shooting at you with a sniper rifle in real time while also whittling down an angry mob of mooks. The last boss, alternatively, plays things fairly straight, but will kill you dead all the same, for reasons that will be incredibly familiar when you get there. No, ultimately, what I found to be the most trialsome element was the chapter-related obstacles. Unlike the spike traps, which threatened death if you ran into them and doubled both as a means to murder mooks as well as bar off paths you've taken, the chapter-specific obstacles don't really reoccur. That said, given they involve things like needing behind cover to avoid a sniper's laser which moves in real time, things get frantic. But as much as it was agonizing to be harried by instant death when standing between hiding spots, it pales in comparison to what was undoubtedly the most vicious obstacle of them all. A fucking moving wall of death lasers that activates shortly after you take your first move in a stage. Yeah, there's an entire chapter of this, and it's an active timer, not one based on the total number of moves you make. So the whole turn-based thing sort of flies out the window. This entire segment just hurt me so much. Like, yes, I could enter the tactical mode you normally activate to place down Robuddy's redirection tiles to pause, but I can't move while that's open, and most of the time if the laser's moving, I'm soon to be deceased unless I'm exit adjacent, so I wound up restarting these levels constantly, trying to figure out what was the optimal path to take, and getting further and further to die to an obstacle, or just the death laser while I'm figuring out this path, and honestly, the level riddled with turrets that came after felt comparatively merciful. At least those don't fire when I'm not moving or not in their line of sight. Though, silver lining. It is fun to play as a different character for a few stages and enjoy what it feels like to be able to take a single hit without falling apart like a soggy tissue. That said, especially given the overall difficulty of the game and the length of some of those chapters, one took me an hour and a half to clear it, it would have been nice to be able to pause a chapter in the middle and quit without restarting the entire thing. Like, I appreciate there being a chapter select as a whole, especially since it does allow you to change your high score for time and total deaths for achievement purposes, but yeah. Also, I would have appreciated being able to map my controls, though they were straightforward enough. I personally preferred using my controller over the mouse and keyboard, however. I'll also say, as much as I have these nitpicks, they don't extend to the sound design. While I didn't walk away raving about it, Red Ronin does have an enjoyable soundtrack, and it never overstayed its welcome despite my sometimes lengthy forays in its stages. And that really counts for something. Also, it's pretty fun on a visual level. Like, it's just satisfying to see things slow down and my afterimage flicker through a row of guys only for them to collapse in bloody heaps. And the game does an adequate job of providing you visual cues to know what is dangerous or to allow you to trace out an optimal route. But was it enough, ultimately? Well, that's where it gets harder for me. I did have fun with Red Ronin, but there were definitely chunks of time where I found myself overwhelmingly frustrated. I'm pretty sure that peaked in the 2 chapters where I needed to contend with 2 real-time mechanics, though more so the advancing laser wall of doom. I also really found myself squinting at the game's narration, as while I did find some of its direction genuinely interesting, I found myself frustrated by the 2 big plot hooks that were just left unattended. It's for these reasons that I found Red Ronin to be more of a fumble. A title that has some fundamental flaws, but that still held enough for me that I enjoyed it, and I'd recommend it if you're both an avid fan of puzzle games and can contend with the frustration that some of its later mechanics will entail. Provided you can, though, it'll definitely provide you avenues to show off your quick thinking skills and enable you to wreak glorious havoc. And hey, maybe you'll get to upstage me and clear the last boss without dying over 40 times. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. And I am also taking this moment to say a big thank you to Batsfine, who's at Batsfine on Twitter, who drew this absolutely adorable bit of fan art, the Arlyeon Evolution, which I guess is an Eevee that got thrown into a dumpster. Beyond that, if you have an interest in supporting my efforts to create new indie reviews, interviews, and gaming content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know when there's a new release. There's also a Discord, links in the description so you can be part of our community, the Crit Hit Cauldron, and there is a link to my Patreon in the description. That said, I'll catch you folks on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks, and if you do feel the need to throw fan art at me, there's always the business email on my YouTube, or you can just contact me in Discord. See ya!